We now have the G7 meetings that are happening this week. China is not physically there, but certainly they are an important part of the audience. What is the message that the United States and other members of the G7 want China to take away from these meetings this week?
David, you're so right. They may not be present physically, but certainly China is one of the main topics. And it appears that the administration is going to work with its allies to try and get a united and very strong statement about being tough on China, both from a national security perspective, but also to coordinate economically.
As President Xi takes a look at his economy right now, does he have any doubts, do you think, at all about its growth pattern? Because it was a true economic miracle in the history of the world. I don't think we've seen anything like it. At the same time, we're getting some numbers, including this week we've gotten some numbers out of China, indicating that that growth is really slowing down. And some people are even saying maybe China will not, after all, pass the United States in the size of its economy.
It's been clear for a long time that Xi Jinping has been worried about the economy. And one of the reasons behind the whole corruption campaign that he started when he first came into office is because they couldn't govern and they were concerned about the state of the economy. And even until today, he's still sending out policy enforcement teams to ensure that mayors and governors are actually implementing the policies that he has dictated from Beijing. They have a lot of reason to be concerned about the economy. As we've seen in reports just recently, youth unemployment is at an all-time high at about 20%. Even though they've dealt with a lot of the systemic risk coming out of the real estate market, for the small and medium-sized real estate companies, a number of them are going to go bankrupt. This has an impact then on the banking system, and while they're not concerned about the large banks, they do believe that a number of the mid-sized banks who are operating in the provinces are facing very difficult challenges.
If, as you say, President Xi is concerned about his economy, does the West, and I mean to include both the United States and Europe and Japan, does it represent a potential help to him, or is it a part of the problem for him?
I think this is going to depend on Xi Jinping himself. And if he decides that he wants to be engaged with the West, then he needs to take the kind of steps to provide market access for companies, to provide more consistency. Regulatory risk is one of the biggest challenges that we see today because we're not quite sure what policies are going to come from the new Xi administration. By the same token, he's very concerned about the export markets. Right now, exports are really what's driving the Chinese economy, and we see weakness in those markets, and certainly as there's concerns about a recession ahead and weakness in some of their export markets, combined with the politics of trade with the United States and trade with the European Union, I think that's a real concern that they have to have. And so part of it is how do they create the confidence at home to unlock consumer demand? And they haven't been able to do that yet. They haven't been able to get consumers out spending their money in any significant way. And at the same token, how do they build relations either with the United States to keep those markets open, or can they find new markets? And part of what we're seeing with this more active foreign policy by Xi Jinping and his new team is how they build relations to compensate for some of the challenges that they're seeing in their trade with the United States.
Do you read very much into the increased pattern, apparently, of meetings with U.S. representatives? We had Jake Sullivan meeting in Vienna with his counterpart. We had Nick Burns, the U.S. ambassador, going in to meet with the foreign minister. Do you read anything into that? Because there's talk maybe Tony Blinken, the Secretary of State, would go over, maybe Janet Yellen.
Mm-hmm. Well, I hope that this is a recognition that there's concern about the free fall of the bilateral relationship. And both sides seem concerned about that. We run the risk of being slightly isolated. As we talked about in the G7 context, certainly the Biden administration would like to ensure that our allies are moving in lockstep with us on China, but we haven't been seeing that necessarily.
One of the stories that's gotten a lot of attention in the United States press, at least, is sort of the curtailment of operations of some of the consulting organizations over in China, the cutting off of data. Is there a risk that we're going to know even less than we did before about what's really going on in the country?
I think there's a large concern about data in many different ways. One is China definitely has been limiting access by foreigners to data, whether it's economic data, whether it's data that they're concerned about on national security purposes. We saw the whole issue when Didi listed overseas and they were forced to delist then from the United States. That was an issue over national security concerns about the kind of data that DD would be sharing. The other thing, obviously one part of that is the access that American or foreign consulting firms get to data, but another part of it is also what the Chinese are planning to do with data. They look at data as a factor of supply. They're creating a new regulator that's going to be in the National Development and Reform Commission, and for them it's almost as a commodity. How can they get access to large amounts of data that they can collect internally as the government? They're developing new regulations to control the flow of data, whether it's cross-border, access by foreign firms, or even internally who gets access to what kind of data. And then they are potentially even looking to commercialize that data.
Deborah, finally, what about capital markets? Because there is a proposed, as I understand, executive order at the White House to limit U.S. investment in China, particularly in technology areas. How big a threat would that be perceived to be by President Xi?
Well, initially, I think it's very clear that some kind of outbound investment restrictions are going to be put in place by the administration. And the big question is how broad they're going to be and whether they're voluntary initially or if you have to have pre-approval. And so it's going to be a big test, and it's going to be much bigger than just capital markets. It's going to actually impact anyone who's looking to invest, even companies who might be looking to make acquisitions or invest in different sectors in China. Initially, the administration is saying it's going to be limited to just a few categories, but subsequent administrations can broaden that. It's going to set an interesting precedent, and it, of course, is of concern to the Chinese. In part, they've been able to benefit, certainly, from capital flowing into China. These days, there's actually a lot of capital in China, and one of the interesting statistics that we've seen recently is China has almost 1,000 billionaires. There's a lot of money in China, and more money from other countries, particularly from the Middle East, is now flowing into China. So it's yet to be seen what the impact is going to be of these outbound investment, but hopefully when the administration does put it in place, it's not putting it in place in a way that disadvantages American companies.